Fighting over community property during a divorce, really nothing unusual. But what if that property has several frozen embryos? This Texas fight gaining national attention because it could end up all the way in the U.S. Supreme Court. And tonight, Michael Otto's tackling this one in tonight's Get to the Point, where you do this. You take these hot button topics every night and get to the bottom of them so we really understand what's going on here. And this is a touchy one.
And it's got a lot of layers to it. I mean, you have to have the wisdom of Solomon to really come up with it.
Well, that's why you're on the job,
That's why we're
Mike.
here. Thank you so much. Let's take you back 5 years so we know how really tough it is to come to a final conclusion on this. Husband and wife having problems getting pregnant, so they go through fertility treatment. Hours before the fertilized eggs were going to be implanted in Augusta Roman's womb, her husband Randy backs out, saying the marriage isn't right. He insists on counseling. They go through the counseling. A year later, they get divorced. That was 4 years ago. Well, today, she still wants to have a baby. She's 47, cannot produce any more eggs. This is her only shot to be a biological mother. Just got off the phone with her. I mean, you can feel the desperation in her voice. And joining us to talk about it now is her attorney, Rebecca Wrights. Rebecca, thanks for being with us. But Rebecca, as we peel back another layer to this, it's the signed contract, and you know where I'm going with this. 3 weeks before the procedure to implant the fertilized eggs into Augusta's womb, her and her husband, Randy, sign a consent form saying, hey, if we end up divorced, the embryos will be discarded. Most people hear that and say, well, I guess this is done. How do you overcome that?
Well, the way you overcome that is just basically, it was a consent form. There were lots of them. There were 7 forms in all. Randy goes through and checks the boxes, and Augusta, who's happily married, excited about having a baby, just goes through and initials after him. You know, in her mind, it was only about remaining embryos after the embryos were implanted, and she, in all likelihood, had already had a baby. And in the way it worked out, the doctor was going to implant all of the embryos. So it wasn't a real decision, and it certainly wasn't something that was dispositive in this situation, because it really had no effect, or would have had no effect.
Right. Okay, let's get Glenn Saxon on this. He's a father's rights advocate and also very familiar with this case. Glenn, let's stay on the topic of that contract for just a second. And the way I understand it is that he knew in his heart that something was wrong with that marriage, but didn't say anything 3 weeks before. He basically kept that to himself. Then at the last minute, he decides he's backing out. Shouldn't he have said something prior to that, and does that change the equation at all?
Well, you know, it's interesting, the vilification of this guy. I think what the guy did actually was rather honorable. I think we'd all agree that too many people, including too many men, they go ahead and have kids without fully thinking it through or without making sure their relationship is good. Randy Roman didn't just stop one day, said, I don't want to do this, bang, I'm out the door. They went through 6 months of counseling afterwards. He said, I'm troubled by the relationship. I'm troubled by things that are going on. Before we have this child, let's work these things out. They went through 6 months of counseling. A year later, they ended up getting divorced. And then he's being vilified for this. I don't get it. I think what the guy was really doing was making sure the marriage was strong before he brought a child into it. I wish a lot more people would do that.
Now, that's a good point after the fact, but I think what's at issue, and when you hear this, he knew a year beforehand that that he had issues with the marriage. The way I understand it, he emailed her sister talking about he had issues with the marriage. So shouldn't he have brought that to her at that point instead of hiding it, letting her go through what can be painful, dangerous procedures concerning the fertility treatment?
You know, I don't know that I would say he was hiding, and he was probably like a lot of people in marriages that have problems. He probably had mixed emotions.
Well, and what we have to say is that we think the trial court awarded those embryos to Augusta because she heard all the evidence of the deception and the fraud and the lack of forthrightness that Randy Roman perpetrated on his wife during this year before, during this time she was going through all these life-threatening procedures.
Hey, Rebecca, I don't
see any deception or fraud.
Well, let's hear from Augusta herself on this. Here's where she stands right now. Again, I just got off the phone with her. Here's what she said recently to a CNN reporter.
I want my children. Those are fetuses. They're my children. You know, they're not just embryos out there.
So, Again, a lot of layers to this. Glenn and Rebecca, we wish we had more time. I know we're just kind of scratching the surface on this one, and again, it's got a lot of layers to it. We wanted you, the viewer, to hear from Augusta as well, and now we want to hear what you think. Should Augusta Rowan be allowed to keep the eggs fertilized by her ex-husband, or is this one case closed? Let us know what you think. Go to our website, cnn.com/Prime News. Send us an email or a V-mail on this topic. And if you want more on this, AC 360 tonight on CNN at 10 o'clock. National correspondent Gary Tuckman, he's been following this one. And in that show, we will hear from Randy Roman to get his side of the story.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Mike, thanks.